So we're going to be working on a Harry Potter painting. This is going to be Hogwarts Castle and the students that are floating in the Hogwarts Lake toward the castle. So I'm starting off here with a black gessoed canvas and I'm adding white gesso, spreading it nice and evenly and keeping it wet. And then just introducing some dioxazine purple and some burnt umber and just getting this covered nice and dark. And I'll go over this a few times just to get the good covering here and keep working, getting a little darker. I'm just adding little bits of black into the canvas as the paint is still wet, and I'm continually trying to get this a little darker, adding little shades of blue and little shades of purple to get this sky completed here. We're just looking at this being a nighttime painting, so we'll have the night sky, we'll have the large moon, and uh, we'll have some cloud coverage and some stars. So now I'm wetting the bottom of the canvas. This will be the lake. And again, adding my gesso and just kind of going through the same process as I do with the sky, using dioxazine purple, some blue, some black, getting this nice and covered evenly here. Make sure there's no ridges between the sky and the lake here. We don't want any paint ridges, so wanting to get that nice and smooth as I bring that in, and continuing to add little bits of black just to keep it dark. So let that dry, and now I'm coming back and I'm beginning to scumble on with my filbert brush um, my cloud formations. And so what I'm mixing here is I've taken ultramarine blue and burnt umber and a little purple and kind of created this bluish gray dark tone, which I will use and cover the entire canvas. And I just stopped there for a moment to go ahead and add in my moon. So here, just kind of adding a very pale blue that I've mixed with ultramarine blue and titanium zinc white. Now I'm coming back with my airbrush. I just want to kind of create a little bit of a hazy halo effect around that moon. And it's important to bring this all in prior to bringing in the rest of my cloud formation, since I'm going to be covering part of the moon um, with the clouds. So I wanted to make sure to get that all kind of worked in here. So I've used my chalk pencil and I've kind of outlined for myself the pattern of the clouds, and also kind of established where I'm going to be having some of my land masses that will be in the far background in the lake. So I continue to go back into that gray mixture that I've mixed together, and working from that pile to add all these different cloud formations, and kind of figuring out where I want to have everything. And I'm just using, for the finer details, I'm using a small filbert brush. I find these filberts do a really good job when it comes to scumbling in clouds in the sky. I tend to use filbert brushes quite a bit for several things, but it's a great brush for dry brush blending. All right, so I'm going to continue to cover. This is a large cloud, so just going through here and slowly kind of working in and adding this cloud mass. Get that all kind of taken care of here, and then we can continue on through. Kind of going through different variations of my gray pile. I'm changing the value somewhat, adding a little more titanium white to lighten it up, making some bluish tones, some grayish tones. And we'll just have a lot of different little layers of color that'll be forming this cloud. All right, so it's beginning to dry now, so I'm coming back and using that filbert brush, and I'm beginning to dry brush blend some texture in the clouds, some layers of highlight, and still trying to keep just kind of think about the basic form of these clouds and get that put here in the background. A lot of the castle will be covering this cloud, and I don't exactly know where it's going to be covering it right now, so it's just a good rule of thumb to go ahead and just paint the whole thing in, and then that way we're not having to paint around our castle, which is never very easy to do. Okay, so now I'm coming back with a very pale white blue that I've mixed with my titanium white and my ultramarine blue, and beginning just to kind of pick out where I think that the moonlight will be reflecting off these clouds. Make sure that as you do this, you don't want to kill all that nice underpainting. So think about your negative space, and make sure that you're allowing a lot of that underpainting of those clouds to kind of come through. And these will obviously be creating sort of that halo effect here as I cap these clouds. It's going to be obviously a little bit lighter going toward the center, toward that moon. And as it works its way out, it'll kind of get more shadowy and a little bit darker. All right, so I'm coming back with my number 0 round brush. It's a nice tiny point on that brush, so I'm coming back through with a little bit more of that lighter blue. Now I'm just kind of lightening it up with more titanium zinc white, and sort of coming through here now and adding that next level of brightness that I think is going to be getting reflected from that moon. And then I can come through at the end with my script liner brush and really add that final little halo effect that we're going to be seeing, that silver lining that we would expect to be seeing on these centermost clouds. So this is kind of the eye of the cloud, and the sky is kind of peeking through. Was the basic just the basic effect I wanted to create. And I'm coming back into this moon now. I'm trying to create the little face of the moon, some of the craters, using just a little bit darker grayish tones to kind of create some of the splotches that we typically see on a full moon. And then coming back again and just continuing to add that silver lining on some of these clouds here. So really want to take some time, kind of work on this sky, make sure that we get it all in there, and then we can kind of move on with everything else in the foreground. Now I'm just kind of refining the clouds. We're kind of getting closer to the end here now on these clouds. So coming through and just adding the final little touches where I think can add some interest into these clouds. Using a lot of kind of blue-gray tones. There's going to be a lot of blue in this painting. It's going to be a very dark painting. There'll be a lot of shadows. So this will just essentially kind of set the tone for the rest of the entire painting. But again, this is a nighttime painting, a nighttime scene of the Hogwarts castle. Going through now and just adding some stars, real simple, just kind of stippling on some stars, and now I can begin to work on this on these most distant hills or foothills that we're kind of seeing way in the back here. And we can start to figure out, this is sort of the water line and reflecting some of that moonlight. So as we move forward, of course, our colors are going to get a little bolder. They're going to typically get a little darker, just to give that impression that these are a little bit closer. So just using a darker form of that blue-gray color that I've mixed with my burnt umber and my ultramarine blue, and and then just adding my variations, going back and changing the value of that to a little bit lighter to add some of those contours in the foothill. All right, now I'm coming back with just a pure black. Obviously, this will be the most close of the three hills here. So again, just trying to create that illusion that it's we've got some ranges here that are kind of layering, and coming back with my gray color and just kind of figuring out where we're going to have some more contour, some more rock formations, some crevices, and doing all that while it's still wet before it dries, so we can get some decent blending. And then I can add some silver lining here with that pale blue color. And that's pretty much the primary kind of theme that we're going to be kind of working through. There's going to be a lot of moonlight here, so we're going to have a lot of filtered light shafting through the entire painting, and a lot of shadow. So I'm coming back with my airbrush here, and I just wanted to get in some of the distant fog that we're gonna have kind of hugging the base of those hills, and adding just a little bit into my clouds just to kind of soften them, kind of brighten the moon, brighten the halo and the haze effect, create some atmosphere. It's kind of what I wanted to achieve here, and I enjoy using the airbrush on these things. It really softens things up quite a bit. I prefer it over just dry brushing it on with the paintbrush. I can get a better, cleaner coverage, better uniformity as I do that. All right, so getting close to finishing up the background here now and adding the silver lining into those foothills a little bit, where we think we're going to be seeing some of that moonlight. Continuing to follow those angles that we've painted in here, some of the brush strokes that I see, and get that worked in. Harry Potter is a very popular theme, so it's always kind of fun to do these types of paintings, and we're big Harry Potter fans in our family. So I've gone ahead and drawn in with my charcoal pencil our Hogwarts castle, and of course I'm blocking this in, so it's going to cover a lot of those lines, which I'll just draw back in later on. But I'm just using a pure black here. Of course, this is going to be on level, on the same horizon point as the closest hillside, so we want to make sure that it's nice and dark, just like that hill. So I'm just using a pure black, coming through and following my lines here, and just painting this all in. So this will just take a few moments to kind of work in and figure out. But it was an interesting challenge. It was a lot of fun, but definitely a painting that I put a lot of detail in, which I think the castle, the Hogwarts castle, is very interesting and unique, and so it was a fun challenge for me to work on this. So we're just going to add these spires and add these different turrets. It'll take a little bit of time. I have to flip the canvas around so that I can reach all those angles. I'm using my handy angle brush, which I find works extremely well for working in different shapes. it works well for really anything when it comes to a lot of the angles and the shapes, forming some of the primary focal points of the painting. I can get the good sharp edges on it. And then I'll come back later, the parts of the areas that I do not get covered on that chalk outline, I'll just erase. It erases really nice and easily, so you just let it completely dry, and then it's easy to remove. So I've come back now that I've blocked in the entire castle, and I've redrawn in some of those important lines to kind of help me to separate out and distinguish all the different sections of the castle. And so I've gotten into my blue gray mixture, that pile that I used for the clouds, and that's what I'm going to use quite a bit now as I start to introduce my highlights into the castle. So I'm using my little filbert brush once again, and the method I like to use after I do the primary blocking phase is just going through and actually dry brush blending with my little filbert brush all these highlights that I'm seeing. And so we'll bring these highlights in, and it just don't have a lot of paint on the brush. You might need to have a paper towel handy and just wipe it off. You don't really want to have to dip the brush into the water. Obviously, we're using acrylic paint here, so you want to make sure that you keep your brush as dry as possible, and that helps it to just get a nice soft blend going through and doing this. And I'll hit this a few different times as I bring in more highlight and more color to brighten it up a little bit more. But right now I just want to think about where the moonlight's going to be hitting the left side of this castle. And we'll go through with each individual section using that blue-gray color, and we'll try to get that all put in here. So it's just good to really slow down and really try to take the time and be patient with this process. There's a lot that goes into this, but I find this is really, for me anyway, the most effective way of accomplishing what I'm trying to do here, and just kind of get everything kind of initially blocked in initially, the primary blocking of the highlights, and then we can start using smaller brushes and start to really bring in the finer details, start to bring in some of the brighter highlights and some of the silver linings. It's really good to use the underpainting. That nice dark black underpainting will be your friend. So try to use those angles and think about how the light will be casting, how certain sections of the castle will be pushing specific shadows certain directions. So that's kind of what I'm trying to accomplish here and think about. But using your negative space and using the underpainting as a tool to your advantage. Now this left side of the castle is dried sufficiently. I can come back here and kind of start adding another level of highlight with using just a little bit more value, lighter value in these sections now. And so this is kind of the next step in the process is going through and just dry brushing on that next level of brightness. And then keep your lines as soft as you can. Keep wiping off your brush and going back and trying to just blend nicely and soften. Acrylic paint traditionally dries so quickly that I find that I almost unless I'm working really fast on a specific object, I don't usually have the luxury of blending time. So dry brush blending is um, really usually for me anyway, usually one of the only ways to get this transition lighting from light to shadow. And it's just the nature of using acrylic. But I like acrylic. I find that I've been painting a lot more with them, and even in tandem with oils, sometimes I'll lay out acrylic first. Um, but it's just a matter of learning the uh, the secrets to utilizing acrylic, which is definitely a different mindset from using oil paint. So the fast dry time can certainly be a curse, but can also be a blessing too. Now I'm coming back, and we're getting some reflective light now on the right side of all these sections of the castle. So I've just mixed a really nice light gray color using burnt umber and ultramarine blue and white. Are my favorite colors for using for creating a gray. And so going back here now and just kind of adding some gray to the shadowed section of the castle. And then from this, we'll be able to add the additional detail, and we can kind of really see now um, where each individual section of the castle really lies now. But it's fun to watch this kind of come alive, just from a big blocked in mass to starting to see some individual sections now into the castle. All right, so we've got these little tiny windows here on top of this building. So I'm just using my black and I'm painting in some of the shadows that are getting thrown from these little dormer windows that we see on top of the roof here. So kind of figuring out where those shadows are going to be cast. Um, and again, I use the charcoal pencil a lot. It's great to give me the guide that I need as I try to figure out where everything is going to be. And I have to go over your highlight section a couple times. As a lot of people who use acrylic know that acrylic is definitely a water-based paint. So there's moisture into the paint, but as that moisture evaporates and as the paints dry, they tend to dry. The color tends to dry a little duller and a little darker. So sometimes you just have to go through that color a few times to make sure that that brightness kind of stays. All right, so I'm gonna start adding my windows now, and I'm blocking in the primary part of these windows. It's a lot of it's going to get covered um, by columns here, which I've now just drawn with my charcoal pencil. But it's just easier, I think, to first paint in the entire window, and then we can start kind of partitioning them off as we bring in these columns now. And this is probably um, definitely one of maybe two or three sections of this castle that certainly was most time consuming, certainly had some of the most detail. It's certainly a prominent feature on the castle. Um, and so it's also central in the painting. So definitely kind of catches the eye. Um, and it certainly took a minute to get this kind of worked out here. Just taking my time and trying to figure out how everything is going to kind of appear. All right, so we're going back and kind of adding some of our details, some of our highlighting here. A lot of the moonlight is definitely casting on this section of the building. So just trying to keep that in mind as I paint in these columns here that are separating these large windows. My ruler comes in really handy too. I'll pull that ruler out quite a bit to kind of get my lines straight and uh, and make sure everything's kind of fairly uniform, fairly even. All right, so I can start working on these windows now a little bit more, really start kind of dividing them out. And then we can start adding some of the highlights, some of the interior lighting to these windows. Right now, just trying to square it up a little bit, make sure everything, all the angles are appropriate. I'm just kind of painting a little bit more of those dormer windows that are casting shadows here on the rooftop. Really used a lot of my dark colors, my purples and blues, my blacks, in my umber. I used a lot of that particular paint and just changed a lot of the values to achieve the different blues and grays and dark colors. All right, so I've kind of mixed with my cad yellow and cad orange and some white, a nice gold color here that I wanted to kind of work in on these windows. These windows, the underpainting of them has dried enough that I can kind of add those in, and I wanted to get those on there first before I start adding in the different window panes with my liner brush, which I'm doing right now. So let that dry fully and then come back with the liner brush and kind of start working out where these window panes are going to be. Do the same at the bottom, and we can call that complete for now. All right, so we're kind of working now on all the little tiny windows on the primary spire here, and so we're kind of, definitely a lot of detail, very tiny. I had to use my liner brush and a fine point to get all the shadowing and all the little windows kind of put in here. And then, of course, these little spires off to the left are going to be casting a shadow. So come through here and kind of add that cast shadow here on the top. I'm trying to find the right value of darkness to kind of match as it should be on there. And come back with the highlights. A few more little tiny windows. I'm just trying to figure out here the right angle here. And we'll just have a little bit of I don't even know what you really even call those on the castle here, but kind of like stonework. We'll highlight here in just a moment. I'm bringing in some lighting with that gold color I mixed. And kind of make it look like we've got some lights on. All right, so we're kind of moving on here now and kind of bringing in some more foreground sections of the castle here. You just kind of want to make, as you put the kind of the lights showing in these windows, it's good just to have a couple windows that are blacked out. A couple of them are kind of dull lighting, and some that have really intense lighting, just kind of based on the angle of the window at the time. But just continuing here and trying to get some of these windows. There's not an enormous amount of detail on the shadowed side that we need to worry about quite so much. That's not really getting hit so much by the moonlight, but just enough detail to kind of give the indication that there's detail without really having, honestly, too much work or detail put into that. So again, it's good to utilize that underpainting to your advantage, and I think just makes things so much easier. All right, so adding a little bit of torch lighting in and around the castle here, and of course across the bridge. And then I've dry brushed on some of that gold and orange colored highlight. That'll be some of the light reflecting in the inner courtyard of the castle, is what I'm trying to effect right there. So definitely an enormous amount of work goes into this, really slowing down, and I used a lot of my really small brushes to get all of this really fine detail. I typically like to work nearly to completion on each section that I'm working on. Try to get as far as I can, usually about 95% done with it. There's always that final refining stage at the very end where I can add additional details, additional highlights, and so forth. But I like to kind of tackle it pretty much all at once as I'm working on those sections, which is kind of what you're seeing me do here. And so kind of skipping ahead here just a little bit in the interest of time. Unfortunately, I can't show everything that I do. There's an awful lot that goes into the painting, even off camera, but nobody wants to watch a 2 or 3 hour video. So to try to keep it within an hour or so, skipping ahead here. And we're getting closer here to the end here on the castle, just adding some of the fun little bits and pieces, and we'll kind of wrap this thing up. But certainly this section of the castle was another challenge. There was a whole lot of detail that kind of went into this part, especially in the fact that there's a lot of highlight because we want to show the moonlight. There's also a lot of cast shadow, so a lot of angles had to be worked, and it just took a good deal of time. But the end result, definitely quite pleased with it as I've worked through it. And so we'll get this thing kind of wrapped up, and we can kind of move on to the bridge here. We'll get these final little windows, little lights here. We've got sort of the large sanctuary, sort of cathedral glass window that's coming up here. Took some time. But really just kind of try to create that illusion of light. And so just mixed a lot of my yellows and oranges and golds to kind of show that we've got these different windows. Want to think about the angles, make sure you're following the proper angles. Get this all worked in here. and just using my small round brush for a lot of those. Add some more highlight there to our large window. And I underpainted that large window with yellow and dioxazine purple. Makes a good yellow shadow color. And then I can go back over that with our gold colors. Try to work in all my detail in this final tower. There's several windows here, some columns. All right, so skipping ahead here a little bit, we're gonna jump here to the bridge. For the most part, we got most of the castle completed, with the exception of kind of working a little bit more highlights. But just going to work on getting this large bridge blocked in right now, again using my black paint. We'll work that in here, and then we can begin. Of course, we'll let it dry, but then we can begin dry brushing on some gray highlight. Make sure following all those angles properly once again. The bridge here on Hogwarts Castle is definitely a distinguishing characteristic to the castle, and one that I wanted to kind of slow down a little bit, take some time on. It's certainly a central portion of the castle and a focal point, but I've let it dry fully now, and then I can come through and add those gentle, soft, dry brushing gray highlights. And then some of the moonlight here, I'm using my bluish color that I've mixed here with ultramarine blue and titanium white. So some of the moonlight's kind of getting cast underneath the bridge, which is what I'm trying to show right here, right now. And of course, some of the interior courtyard lighting from a lot of the torches are going to be reflecting here underneath the bridge as well. So this kind of serves to add a little bit more interest here into the painting. I can continue to slowly scumble on a little bit more highlight as I go along. And then just kind of square things up and kind of perfect some of the columns, some of the angles here a little bit more. And then I can draw on the windows. I just find it easier to first block it in primarily. And then of course I can draw in the windows, and then it's just easier to fill in those windows with my black paint, as opposed to going through and trying to work around the windows earlier on. Just a little method here to the madness. But I'll look for any shortcuts that I can. The painting already has enough challenging attributes to it without making my life any harder. Now it's just kind of hitting that refining stage right now, kind of changing some of my values a little bit more, trying to square things up, and kind of just the smaller details here that we have to work through and improve. Highlighting some of my moonlight. erase my lines there now, and we can kind of move on. So for the most part, we again got about 95% done with our castle, and now we can start working on the cliffs here in the foreground. And I'm just using, again, pure black, and I think this is midnight black I'm using, and fully getting this blocked in here with my large angle brush. And I love the contrast here is that I wanted to make sure that I was putting my rock formations right over the lake and over a portion of the foothill. And that really helps to serve to really push those land formations further back into the painting, kind of give that illusion of distance. But I love contrast, and I always look for opportunities to introduce contrast between my lights and darks. And this painting was a great subject matter for introducing a lot of contrast into the painting. And of course, I've drawn in my little boathouse here. We'll kind of paint around the boathouse, and I'll save the boathouse for a little bit later and kind of work on that individually. But it's again another really important feature to the painting is the little boathouse in the front foreground of the painting. So just kind of work around that, and then just make sure I'm getting all the right rock formations that I'm wanting to capture as we block in the rest of these cliffs. So we get this all blocked in, we'll let it dry, and then I'll come back through with kind of a dark gray color. So I've also drawn in, again, I use my charcoal pencil, kind of drawn in some of my primary angles to my cliff as a guide, and now I can go back with my gray mixture of sienna and ultramarine blue and titanium white. I've kind of opaqued it, highlighted it a little bit more, and now I can just kind of scumble on some of the formations we're seeing in the rocks, some of the cracks in the rocks and the different sections of the cliffs. Again, using my filbert brush is an excellent tool for this technique here to get this all dry brushed on. I find that I usually tend to use filberts for a lot of dry brush blending, and I've got different size filbert brushes specifically for this type of tool to use. So get that kind of worked in here real quick, and then I've mixed a light blue, again a lot of blue moonlight getting cast through that we'll be using as well. Now because there's going to be some lighting here, I'm kind of just adding a little bit of highlight using some of my golds and yellow colors, and then coming back to my blue mixture, ultramarine blue, titanium zinc white, to make this light blue color, and we can kind of start adding some of the primary highlights for the moonlight that's casting here. So you want to definitely bounce around. You don't want to have a lot of straight solid lines. You just want to make them kind of spaced and jagged. Kind of gives the impression you've got some kind of raw, sharp rock protrusions here. And then I'm coming back with a pure white, just using pure titanium zinc white. And I'm using it sparingly, but I am kind of hitting some of the brightest highlights, some of the hottest hot spots that are reflecting here on the rocks. And you just want to again just kind of dance around with it. Don't try to fill in too much with it. It can certainly overpower the painting, and you won't be happy with it if you use it too much. So very sparingly use that white, coming through and kind of completing that now, adding some silver lining a little bit to the rocks. I painted Hogwarts Castle probably about 2 years ago. I didn't record it, and I was at the time I had just started using um, acrylic, and I wasn't really very good with acrylic, and I was also using heavy body acrylic, which doesn't work very well in Colorado with the dry climate we have out here. So it was drying so quickly that I really couldn't manage it very well and transition it very well. So I never really liked the painting. I guess the painting was okay, but I always thought to myself I wanted to redo it. And when I got introduced to the Golden Open series of acrylic paints, which are much slower drying than heavy body acrylics, I found that I had just more dry time, more blending time. They were just they worked much better in my environment here in Colorado. So finally got back around to trying my hand at repainting Hogwarts again, and thought it'd be a fun tutorial video, um, since Harry Potter is so very popular. Um, I've done a number of Harry Potter style paintings in the past, um, and they're just a lot of fun. They're very popular. All right, so I've drawn in. We've got our little stairwell here, uh, our stairs that go all the way down into the to the lake and into the lake house, or the boathouse. So drawing that in with my charcoal pencil, and then just going back through with my pure black. And that's really the theme. Bring in the black, let it dry a little bit, scumble on the highlights with the grays and the blues, and then add the final um, silver linings. And before we know it, we've got a nice little stairwell here. It's just kind of following those angles, and and creating this little stairwell. And of course, on this stairwell, we're going to have some torches or lamps that are shining as well, which is why I wanted to paint in some of the highlight on the stone formations here by the stairwell as reflected light from those torches. So kind of coming through here and just kind of dotting them on with my gold color I mixed, orange, yellow, and white, and then I just add a little dot of pure white titanium right in the center, and it really helps it to pop quite a bit. Adding a little more highlight on my stones now. All right, now we can kind of make it here to our little boathouse, and just like I did with the castle, just completely block this entire thing in with our dark black acrylic paint, and then we'll let that dry. We can start adding those highlights. All right, so let that dry, and I've come back and, of course, created my little guide here with my charcoal pencil. So I kind of know where I'm going now. And we can bring in that same blue-gray color for our highlights. Again, not a lot of paint is on my little filbert brush here. And, you want some of that dark underpainting to sort of show through. So even using a little bit of white, because these paints are so transparent anyway, um, I didn't use a whole lot of white to opaque it, just because I wanted some of that dark underpainting to sort of show through um, our blue color there. So not a lot of paint on the brush, just keep it nice and dry, and that will allow you to be able to soften your strokes a little more and help it to transition better from your light to your dark. I'm adding some of my reflected light here on the opposite side. And then of course when we get the kind of the shadows and the light sources kind of figured out here, then it's much easier to go back and then start adding those tiny little details. Some of the shadows from the roof, the overhanging portion of the roof, and some of the highlights from the moon. Get some of that silver lining put in with some of our pure white color. And then of course just used a really kind of gold color here, but added a little bit of dioxazine purple to keep it muted and a little bit on the dark side, and that'll help for when I add my highlights of the lighting. Go through and add our windows. We've got some bright light shining through on the windows. Start doing my highlights here inside the mouth of the building. We'll let those windows dry and come back and we can add our window panes. Can add some additional highlights. Kind of scumbling on some halo from the lamps right outside the building there. Just using that gold color once again. Now we're kind of hitting that refining mode here, slowing down, adding some of the finer details, making sure that my lines are all straight. It just takes time. You just got to have fun with the process and be patient with it, and it'll come. I'm dotting some pure titanium white into the window section there. Let that dry, and I can add the window panes in a moment. I'm just bringing in the next layer of stones that are protruding here by the boathouse and into the water. Just painting that all pure black once again. Kind of create some of the shadows that are reflecting off of the stone. Using my script liner or my felt tip pen here to add those window panes. They're such tiny windows that I just wanted to get good clean straight lines. So I do enjoy using my felt tip pen, and for those of you who've watched other videos know that I like to use it from time to time to create the really good lines. All right, so now that those boulders have dried, I can again scumble on the gray stones and some of the reflections from the moon here, using some of the blues and grays that I've mixed here or pre-mixed. We can add some silver lining, and before we know it, we've got some nice stonework here. All right, so I'm coming back now with my airbrush and going back to those individual little torches that we painted in, and I'm just adding a tiny little halo. I've mixed some airbrush paint of some titanium white and a little bit of yellow, and kind of created a nice, soft, hazy yellow, light yellow color. And I can just go through and really help the lighting, some of it in the windows, really just to kind of pop and really shine and get a really good bright effect here. Don't hit every window. You want to kind of skip around, and just do it to a few of the windows. Of course, I'm getting into the courtyard where we have some pretty strong lighting there as well. But just a good little technique to really help bring the soft glow out. All right, so we can start kind of working on our lake now, and I'm just bringing some of the reflection from the castle and from the cliffs here, and some of the foreground cliffs are a little bit darker. I've brought in some extra stones that are protruding out of the water. We'll want to have some reflection in the water underneath those as well. So you just want to kind of follow the angles of the stone to make it appear like a reflection. All right, so I'm coming back now with my script liner brush. And this is a little tedious, but I'm trying to create little ripples, and create some little sparkles in the water. And of course, as you're further back into the painting, they're going to be quite tiny, and I'm really kind of dotting them on. And as I move closer to the foreground in the painting, they will naturally those ripples will naturally get a little broader, a little longer and larger. So going right back over here, you want to go over the shadow, um, the cast shadow from the building and from the stones with your little water ripples, and that'll help to really seat the reflections into the water a little bit better. So it took quite a bit of time going through and bringing in all these little sparkles and little water formations, small little choppy ripples and waves that we're seeing in the lake. And then I'm working from the foreground up to the back, and again, just trying to have larger ripples, but gradually growing smaller. And I'm just using a light gray for this, using sienna, or sorry, umber and ultramarine blue and white to form these ripples. So going a little bit lighter gray than the reflections of the underpainting on the stonework. So I'm adding a little bit of blue here now and just kind of dry brushing it on and hazing it. These are the reflections of the moonlight into the stone a little bit. I think we'd be able to see that in the lake as well, since it's so dominant um, in the cliffs that we've painted in. It's a little more reflection here, and wanted to get this all kind of worked in before we brought in our students. Of course, much easier to get the paint, the lake painted in and kind of squared away before bringing in the little boats and all the little students floating on the lake. As I move into the reflected sky portion of the lake here, with the moonlight, it's of course going to naturally get a little brighter. So I've just painted, or I've mixed just a little bit lighter, paler blue color here, and just kind of forming those little ripples in the water. And again, slowly making them smaller as I work my way back. Now we know because of the moon, we're going to have some pretty intense moonlight coming through. I'm just kind of eyeballing with my brush, making sure I'm directly underneath the moon. You don't want to be offset from the moon when you put your reflections in, but going a little bit lighter on that pale blue, and ultimately I'll bring in pure titanium zinc white, and I'll just use it in the centermost portion of the moon reflection. It's bringing additional little dots and twinkles way deep in the lake in the very far background, which is directly underneath the moonlight. And I'm using pretty thick titanium zinc white paint. I'm putting it on the brush pretty thick, and I'm just going through and I'm just adding little stipples, little dots, and that'll serve as some of the twinkling sparkle in the lake. And as I go through here, I can just randomly sort of add a few dots here, a few dots there. I think we're going to have some random sparkles throughout the lake with that moonlight. And then just work those sparkles up closer to the foot of the cliff section here. And we got quite a bit of moonlight reflecting into the water here as well. So we're going to see some additional little sparkles. And of course, I'm just kind of dotting them all throughout the entire lake. But as I move closer to the shadow section, it's a little more sparing, a little more spaced out, not quite as many of these little sparkles that I'm putting in. But it's the same as when we put the stars in the sky, the exact same technique. Just use a nice thick paint. I glop it onto the end of the brush, and I just start to dot it directly onto the canvas. And it creates a kind of a nice little effect. All right, so I've drawn in our little boats and our little students that are huddled in these boats, and just going to block these in real quick, doing the exact same technique you see me do all along in this painting. Use our black paint, completely block it in. I can come back with my charcoal brush and I can redraw back in all of my lines so that I know how I'm separating all the little Hogwarts students out here as they're going, their first year students getting ready to go to the sorting hat, figure out what house they're in. So the books are a lot of fun. And like I said, we're big fans. So we'll get this completely blocked in here. We'll let it dry, and then we'll be able to start to add our highlights. So now I've redrawn in our students. I kind of know where I'm going now, where I'm going to be adding each student. Kind of work around that. Of course, they're wearing their Hogwarts robes, getting a little bit of moonlight reflecting off a little bit of their robes here. Kind of work their little heads here and their hair. Every boat has its own little lamp, so it's going to be casting light and shadow. So I'm just using my small number 0 round brush here, a nice little detail brush. I'm not putting a whole lot of paint on the brush here. I definitely am doing a dry brush blending technique here because I want to use a lot of that underpainting. I really want it to work with me. And I can, with less paint on the brush, I can definitely transition my lights to darks much easier. So we're working their hair, and a lot of them are haloed with light. Um, and we're kind of seeing the back of their heads here as they're floating toward the castle. And some of them have blonde hair, some of them are brown, some of them are black-headed, um, and so just trying a couple variations of hair colors just to show that we've got a mix of students here floating in their boat. Okay, so we're going to add our little highlights here and our silver linings into the boat itself. We're going to be getting a little bit of moonlight cast on there as well as a little bit of lamplight from the boat itself. So we'll kind of have some highlights on both sides of the boat. And not a tremendous amount of detail needs to go into these boats. They are certainly mostly in shadow. It's a very dark painting once again, but just want to add enough brush strokes to give the illusion that we've got detail, even though we don't have too much detail here, um, and and that we've got these students here in the boat. So, of course, it's going to be casting a shadow underneath in the ripples in the water. So now we're going to paint in our little lamp. Here first we're going to, of course, get some of the light that from the lamp that will be reflecting into the water as well. So I just am using my gold color that I've put together. And we'll quickly block that in. And then later on we can add more lighting and more halo and more some more nice soft um, lighting coming through. So I'm not going to show me painting all the boats. I think I do a demonstration on this one. This is with Hagrid. This is Hagrid's boat. So this is Hagrid's big bushy head. And we'll get him and we'll get his students in and I'll demonstrate that. And then after that, I don't think I show anymore. It's pretty repetitive. Um, but a good exercise nevertheless. So I'm really being careful. I'm just barely kind of grazing and dotting on uh, his hair and the students as well. We want to make sure it's pretty soft and pretty subtle. They are reflecting some of the lamp light in their heads. But again, I just stress you use a very conservative amount of paint on this brush, and a lot of times I'll add a stroke. I'll go and wipe my brush off on the paper towel, and I'll come back and I'll just dry brush around that stroke to create some of the subtle transition, some of the softness. It'll naturally start to sort of darken as it picks up using some of that underpainting black as well. But that's really kind of the easiest way to do this, specifically because it is so tiny and there is a good amount of detail with the silver lining that we're getting here. So I'm just kind of re-going over some of the blocked in dark black background so that I'm kind of covering up some of the brush strokes that I'm seeing after it had dried the first time, just getting a second layer of paint on there. And start kind of highlighting here the boat itself now, picking up some of that lighting from the lamp from the neighboring boat. Now we're just kind of going to be adding this lamp back in just like we did the last time. Get that blocked in, let that dry. Gonna add a little bit of highlight. Right now I'm coming back now. I've painted all the boats in, and I'm just spraying with my spray gun here, and just getting in all these little soft glows. Now I'm using pure gesso here, and I've just kind of added a little dot of it into those lamps to make them a little brighter. And with that, we can call this painting complete, and I can sign my name here. And I appreciate you tuning in and watching this painting. I hope you enjoyed it. It was a lot of fun to do. Definitely a challenge. There's a lot of detail into it. Took quite a long time, and I'm sorry that I couldn't show it all to you. But hopefully, I caught the highlights of most of the paintings that you could see, and hopefully that was helpful. That maybe you can do your own. Please visit my YouTube channel, Marc Harvill Arts. Please subscribe, and I appreciate your comments, appreciate your support, and I'll look forward to doing another fun, exciting project here in the near future that I can record and that I can share with you. And so again, yes, thanks so much for tuning in, and I appreciate everything. Have a good one.